the history of talking about what's great about this game of baseball. There's so much stuff that we talk about.
I would say, but I would say the reason why they want to have is baseball going into the baseball sport that is brought into baseball, and from the baseball angle, I'm not going to speak of any other sport.
Let me start by telling you this. I have never used steroids, period.
Jerry,
Just remember.
It's not a lie. You believe. Sell the team.
Good morning, everybody. This is another edition of the Passball Show brought to you by JohnPielli.com, by Two Ways, One Passion Food Truck located in Scranton, Pennsylvania, by St. Aloysius Church and School in Jackson, New Jersey. A handful of things we're going to get into today. And honestly, we could do a show about a bunch of different things. There are some basketball topics that I want to hit up, a little bit of a recap of the national championship game. You got Championship Sunday in the National Football League, where this Sunday we'll find out who's going to play in the Super Bowl this year. OBJ, who, by the way, I have gained so much respect for him. I'll tell you maybe Saturday whether I've done a full 180 in my opinion about him. But listen, I could do an hour show. I could do a 2-hour show. Talk about some aspects of this Houston Astros cheating scandal that are not getting brought up. And it's kind of bothering me because there's been one lazy, boring take that has been thrown on this, and it has to do with basically throwing the book at him. And I don't generally write down points, but there's 4 major things that I have to get into. And if I don't get this off my chest, I'm going to explode. Just a reminder, the show belongs to you, so anything that's on your mind in the world of baseball, sports, and unifying America, just friggin' let me know. So the first thing that we do as a general public, especially when there's a scandal like this, we assume that things are the absolute worst. So everything that is caused from one angle is going to result in the worst thing happening. The Astros cheating means that the Astros would have lost 100 games if they didn't cheat. The cheating was the reason that the Astros were as good as they were. That's the reason that they won the World Series in 2017. That's the reason that they made the postseason in 2015. They were in the playoffs again in 2018 and made the World Series in 2019. Absolutely 100% because they were cheating. That's what's assumed all the time. This was obviously not a bad baseball team. And because we're only talking about circumstantial evidence, there's no way we're ever going to be able to figure out exactly how much the cheating and the advantage that they had by circumventing the cameras that were involved for replay and using them to figure out which pitches were coming, which, by the way, you still, I don't care how you say it, have to be able to hit a baseball. You can know a fastball's coming, you still got to know how to hit it. So I have a problem with that. The assumption that the Astros would have been absolutely nothing if they didn't cheat. Now, did they need to cheat? Probably not. And that's why A.J. Hinch was pissed off. That's why A.J. Hinch broke a couple monitors, as you hear in the report. Because the Astros were probably good enough that they could have won without cheating. But now, because they did, we're going to assume that this was like the worst team in baseball. So all of a sudden we hear the 2017 Los Angeles Dodger fans crying that, well, the Dodgers should have won the World Series if the Astros didn't cheat. We got the 2017 New York Yankee fans that are bitching and complaining and crying, saying that the Astros only beat them in the American League Championship Series because they cheated. Poor Joe Girardi lost his job because the Astros cheated. The Astros were still a pretty good freaking baseball team. And I'm going to talk right over this opening point that we have right here on the Passball Show. You could talk about the Yankees, the poor Los Angeles Dodgers. Those teams might not have been good enough to beat the Astros if they didn't cheat. Now, once again, it goes back to my point that I made. They probably didn't have to do this in the first place. They were a good enough baseball team, and should have been smart enough to know that something like this was going to be unearthed over a series of time. Second thing we have to talk about is blood. Fans, the media want blood. And a lot of it has to do with a low self-esteem. A lot of that has to do with the fact that most people that are calling for the worst of the worst don't have very much going on in their lives. And if you are as outraged and you want to see as many people lose their jobs as possible, it's more on you than it's on them. The Major League Baseball suspended Jeff Luhnow and A.J. Hinch for a year for their involvement in this cheating scandal. Astros owner Jim Crane fired them both as a result of this cheating scandal. Now, the rest of the investigation is not yet finished, involved with the Boston Red Sox and Alex Correa, and exactly how much Alex Correa was involved in this, though it looks like he really was. The Boston Red Sox fired Alex Correa. So you're talking about three major people that were involved in this that lost their jobs. Not only did they lose their jobs, but they're probably in a position where it's going to be very hard to hire them right now. It's going to be very hard to hire them, any one of those three, next year. Maybe down the road. You know, we believe in second chances. You've heard me talk about that before. People that have been rehabilitated, people that have made mistakes, deserve the opportunity to do something again. So I'm not against any of them getting another chance, but the bottom line is that second chance isn't going to come for a little while. So you're really talking about serious penalties for those that were involved. And now we want to take it a step further, and we want to have a manager fired that was a player at the time. And I'll get into the players in a minute because that's going to be my next point. Part of the blood is to want to see as many major people or major names fall within a scandal. And the general public is going to keep pushing this, and the media is going to keep pushing this. And I tell you this, I'm putting my faith in the New York Mets that they're going to do the right thing here. And the right thing is not to fire Carlos Beltran. Carlos Beltran was a player at the time. Carlos Beltran might have been involved with it, but there's no evidence that he was any more involved than any other player. And I will talk about the players aspect in this in a minute. If the Mets cave in to what the media says and what the fans tell them to do, then shame on them. Because in the end, the blood that is seeped by the fans and by the media is not going to stop. The problem I have when it comes to the players is Tony Clark, Major League Baseball Players Association, instructed their players not to speak about anything involved in this investigation. Part of it was Rob Manfred, the commissioner, basically making it known that in situations like this, he's going to go after the executives, he's going to go after the field manager, he's going to go after coaches, but he's not going to go after the players. So, Tony Clark, maybe with some advice from Donald Fiers, makes sure that the players don't say a word. None of the players say a word at all. Carlos Beltran is no longer part of the Players Association. He is no longer an active Major League Baseball player. So guess what? He has to talk. He doesn't get any immunity. He doesn't get a chance to just not comment because he's no longer an active player. So Carlos Beltran has to talk. Carlos Beltran is investigated. Carlos Beltran is named many times in this report when, by the way, there were other players that were just as guilty, but they were not named because they're still active players. Here's what I have to say. If the decision is brought down by Major League Baseball that Carlos Beltran is to get suspended for part of this season or all of the season, that's fine. But if the decision is made by the New York Mets to fire Carlos Beltran, who was a player at the time, then this needs to be raunching it up a little bit. Alex Bregman needs to be fired. Jose Altuve needs to be fired. Carlos Correa needs to be fired. George Springer needs to be fired. And if you want to fire a player, which you're doing with Carlos Beltran, you better fire the other players that were involved in this. Jose Altuve, Alex Bregman, Carlos Correa, George Springer need to be fired. And if you're afraid of the Players Association, then you know what? You better up your lawyers. You better make this the biggest friggin' scandal in sports history. You better go for the entire blood instead of partial blood. And because Carlos Beltran is vulnerable, because he's no longer an active player, and he doesn't have the protection of the Major League Baseball Players Association, he is not to be the sacrificial lamb here. If Carlos Beltran loses his job, Alex Bregman needs to lose his job. Carlos Correa needs to lose his job. Jose Altuve, George Springer, they need to lose their job. The other part of this that we have to talk about is the investigation that's going on with the Boston Red Sox. Alex Cora goes from the World Series champion Houston Astros team as the bench coach, gets the job as the manager of the Boston Red Sox for the 2018 season. A good baseball team. They end up winning a World Series. And obviously, if Alex Cora was as involved as it's assumed that he was with the 2017 Houston Astros cheating scandal, then there's something to him bringing it to Boston with the Red Sox in 2018. And of course, the Red Sox, they win the World Series. So once again, we'll go to point number one, right? The poor Los Angeles Dodgers would have won the World Series in 2018 if it wasn't for the Boston Red Sox who cheated. The Cleveland Indians would have beaten the Boston Red Sox in the American League Championship Series if it wasn't for the cheating Boston Red Sox. The New York Yankees, the poor New York Yankees who lost to the Boston Red Sox in the division round of the 2018 playoffs, they obviously would have beaten the cheating Boston Red Sox. And obviously this is an investigation that's still being done right now. We're going to figure out exactly what happened. Obviously it doesn't look good for Alex Cora, but if there's some sort of similar thing that's unleashed that the Boston Red Sox were doing, then I'm concerned that this is a little more widespread than we're making it out to be. We're making the Houston Astros out to be the 1919 Chicago White Sox. And I don't know if they necessarily are. We're going to find out the depths of the involvement of the Boston Red Sox of 2018 and whether there was anything before that or anything after that. And we're going to start to see bits and pieces of people saying stuff like Logan Morrison, that the Yankees and the Dodgers were doing things similarly. And the issue really comes down to the fact that replay cameras were put within the view of managers and coaches to make that quick decision over whether a play should be reviewed or not. And I think that is the biggest problem that's led to the circumventing of the camera and the use of camera for other things. And it's no way to make an excuse for anything that was done by the Houston Astros or any other Major League Baseball team. But those cameras should be removed. The replay rule should be an instant decision. The manager sees it in real time. And if he wants to use the challenge, he uses it then, or he doesn't use it at all. No viewing a camera. Get those cameras out of the clubhouses. Get those cameras out of the dugouts. In Major League Baseball, if you don't want anything like this to ever happen again, if you're worried by this little black mark that you're looking on the game that we feel, by the way, is so beloved and has so much integrity, which, by the way, it doesn't. Get those freaking cameras out of the dugout. Get them out of the clubhouse. At some point, we'll figure out exactly how widespread this is. And it gets into my fifth and final point about this situation. Mike Fiers, former Astros pitcher, becomes that quote-unquote informant. And we know what happened to informants back in the mob days, right? Now he does something that he believes is right for the game by speaking out. And I'm going to tell you why Mike Fiers is a complete phony right now. He may have supplied information that was 100% true. He may have told the truth, which there's nothing you can fault the person for telling the truth. But he decides to tell them, or he decides to fess up after he is no longer playing for the Houston Astros. So while he was a member of the Houston Astros and had no problem benefiting from the fact that the Astros were cheating, he didn't say nothing. And it's the same reason that A.J. Hinch was suspended by Major League Baseball, by the way. A.J. Hinch, from the research that was done and the reports that were put together and all the data that was collected, it was determined that A.J. Hinch really had nothing to do with this. He knew what was going on, but he was not part of what was making this into what it was. He didn't like it. He broke some of the cameras. He didn't feel like the Astros needed to do it. But you know what? Going back to Buck Weaver and the 1919 Chicago White Sox, Buck Weaver knew that the players were talking about fixing the World Series and didn't say anything. A.J. Hinch knew that the Astros devised a system where they were using the replay cameras and manipulating them to know what sign the catcher was putting down for their own advantage. And he didn't say anything. Mike Fiers was part of that team. And even though he looks like a hero right now, because he's the informant, he's the one that spoke up. He's the smoking gun. He's the white elephant in the room. Mike Fiers knew what was going on while it was happening and didn't say anything. He is just as guilty as A.J. Hinch. And if you want to say Carlos Beltran is guilty, so is Jose Altuve, so is Alex Bregman, so is Yuli Gurriel, so is Carlos Correa, so is George Springer, so is anybody else that benefited from that sign-stealing mechanism. And when I look at Alex Bregman looking into that camera in the dugout after he hits a home run, you don't think that guy deserves any punishment? But once again, when we're talking about blood, it only applies to people in higher positions. God forbid Major League Baseball goes after the players like they did the 1919 Black Sox. I want to see suspensions for the players if Carlos Beltran gets fired as manager of the New York Mets. And if Carlos Beltran faces a suspension of anything more than a half a year, I want some sanctions against the players of the Houston Astros. Talking about this as one of the major scandals in all of sports history. And there's a couple other ones you could obviously compare it to. You could talk about the 1919 Black Sox. 8 players. One of them, Fred McMullen, was not a regular player, but he said he was going to rat if he wasn't included. Eddie Seacott, Lefty Williams, Happy Felch, Chick Gandil, Swede Risberg, of course, Joe Jackson and Buck Weaver. Players that were banned for life for Major League Baseball. Joe Jackson's involvement, not necessarily proven. Was he playing a game on the level? It looks like he was. He hit .375 in the series. Buck Weaver didn't want anything to do with it, but he knew about it. And he also faced a lifetime ban. I've said before that, the reinstatement of Buck Weaver is not to put him in the Hall of Fame. It's just to reinstate his good name. which really should be done. Yes, he made a mistake by sitting in on those meetings, but there was no reason to ban this guy for life because he didn't throw the World Series. He was not Eddie Seacott. He was not Lefty Williams or Chick Gandil or Swede Risberg. Those guys deserve to be banned for life. So another scandal that kind of sticks in my head is the bounty scandal involving the New Orleans Saints. And remember the depths of that, Greg Williams, the defensive coordinator, the instructions on putting bounties on certain players. Hey, if you injure this player, then you're going to get a bonus. And obviously you're talking about players' livelihoods. You're talking about people getting hurt. Not little fans, not fans and their pussy little feelings. But you're talking about actual players getting hurt. And the investigation was done by the National Football League, and it was determined that there was wrongdoing. Sean Payton, who was the head coach there, may not have necessarily endorsed it. It may not have necessarily been his plan, but he was suspended for an entire football season. Greg Williams, who was the architect, was suspended indefinitely. How does it compare to what we're seeing here with the Houston Astros? The coach, he's still in charge of everything. A.J. Hinch was suspended for a year, which was the exact penalty that Sean Payton got with the New Orleans Saints. The only difference was Saints ownership didn't fire Sean Payton. And Jim Crane, the owner of the Houston Astros, had the right to do what he did. And he fired Jeff Luton out as general manager, who has a checkered history. Absolutely. He is one of the most hated front office executives in all of Major League Baseball. Remember the situation with the St. Louis Cardinals when he left the Cardinals to go to the Astros? And that guy who coincidentally I think his name was Correa with the St. Louis Cardinals got into the Astros database. Ends up being banned for life. Jeff Luton now throughout baseball is not beloved. He is known as a guy that a lot of people don't like. The Brandon Taubman situation, where he flips out about, I'm so glad we effing got Osuna. Not talking about him as a pitcher, talking about the fact that they traded for a player that was a domestic abuser. And, God forbid you have a problem with that. Now, I believe in second chances. I believe the guy deserves the right to work. But when you got an executive that's gloating about it, basically to rub it in the face of a female reporter, that doesn't look good for you either. When you employ people like that say things like that. And now you throw this scandal on top of it, Jeff Luton now does not come out looking like a good guy. I think it's going to be hard to see him get a job down the road. Now, will team say, hey, what can we learn from Jeff Luton now? What can he bring to the table that, first of all, is within the parameters of the rules? No team's going to want to hire Jeff Luton now and have him, teach them all their cheating ways. But obviously, he's good in data and analytics and what the pitchers are doing with the spin rates and the fact that Justin Verlander has resurrected his career. Garrett Cole may not pitch any better than he did for the Houston Astros with all the data that they got there. So maybe down the road he gets a job again. A.J. Hinch kind of looks like, he almost looks like a Sean Payton. Sean Payton gets suspended for a year, comes back. He's still one of the best coaches in the National Football League. And all of a sudden we want to forget that Sean Payton was involved in his bounty scandal. Think about the Patriots and the spy cameras that they had on the opposing sidelines. It was determined that they did something wrong. They were fined. Bill Belichick didn't get suspended. Probably because there was enough spin to put it on somebody else. Hey, what's that guy doing with the camera? I didn't ask him to do it. Think of Kid Gleason, the manager of the 1919 White Sox. He's portrayed as the victim. If you watch the movie 8 Man Out, if you've seen any documentary about the 1919 Black Sox, Kid Gleason, all he wants to do is win. He thinks he's got the best team in baseball, and that team was pretty good. That team was so good that their odds of winning the World Series were tremendous in 1919. No sanctions against Kid Gleason, even though he was in charge. There was no evidence that he was receiving any money. So I do think there's some gray area if you want to say that maybe there is a less amount of guilt that we're throwing out here. And once again, the aspect of this that is pissing me off the most is the players are getting off the hook. Maybe Marvin Miller would have handled it the same way. Maybe Donald Fiers and Gene Orza and Michael Weiner would have done it the same way. The bottom line is you're talking about players that benefited from this. Players that you probably find out were more involved in this than we're letting on to. But because they were told not to speak and refused to speak, they're let off the hook pretty easy here. And once again, I'll say this again because I have to. If Carlos Beltran loses his job because of his involvement as a player, then I'm going on a Twitter campaign for Alex Bregman, Carlos Correa, Jose Altuve, Yuli Gurriel, George Springer. I want them all fired. I'm calling their Twitter handles out. They are to be fired. Because they shouldn't get off scot-free. If a fellow player is not allowed to have a job in Major League Baseball because of it. Jim Crane, I hope you're listening to this. Because if you're going to fire your general manager and your manager, you sure as hell better think about firing the players that were doing this too. And every one of those players that were involved in this and are watching other people lose their jobs and the potential for another former player to lose their job, you should be ashamed of yourself. You should think about giving up your own job too. This is the Pass Ball Show brought to you by St. Aloysius Church and School in Jackson, New Jersey, by 2A's One Passion Food Truck located in Scranton, Pennsylvania, and of course by johnpielli.com. Today we're talking about a couple dynamics to the Astros cheating scandal, and I think there's an angle here that is not being discussed. It's the fact that, number one, we assume the worst, and it's human nature, that the Astros would not have won the World Series in 2017 if they didn't cheat. We're never going to know the extent, but we know it stinks. We know there's some gray area in there, so we're going to assume the worst. We're going to assume that the Astros would not have won the World Series in 2017, would not have gotten to the World Series in 2019, would not have gotten to the American League Championship Series in 2018. How involved are the Boston Red Sox? We'll figure that out over time. Blood. We want to see blood. We want to see more people lose their jobs. We want Carlos Beltran to lose his job, even though he was a player. And as I'm moving to my third point, Carlos Beltran loses his job. Alex Bregman needs to lose his job too. Jose Altuve needs to lose his job too. Carlos Correa needs to lose his job too. George Springer needs to lose his job too. Yuli Gurriel needs to lose his job too. If you want blood, then you better get all the blood. Don't be selective in the people that you want to see go down. How much did Alex Cora devise a sign-stealing scheme with the 2018 Boston Red Sox? That investigation is going on. How many other teams are taking those replay cameras and using them to steal signs? Is it 2 out of 30? Is it 5 out of 30? Is it 30 out of 30? Because in the end, if we find that so many more teams are doing this than not, is there really a victim here? Exactly. Mike Fiers He looks like this perfect informant, the nice guy, the Henry Hill of this investigation. If A.J. Hinch is penalized for not speaking up when he knew, even though he wasn't involved, why the hell didn't Mike Fiers say anything in 2017? All of a sudden, he turns coat in 2019 when he's pitching for the rival Oakland Athletics. How convenient. What a jerk. What a fraud. You want to talk about a fraud? Mike Fiers is a friggin' fraud. And the last aspect of this that I need to bring up, Major League Baseball needs to take those cameras in the dugout and get them the hell out. Take those cameras that are in the clubhouse and get them the hell out. You want to have a replay rule in Major League Baseball? Tell that umpire to the Major League Baseball manager to friggin' open your eyes and see something in real time. And if you want to give a Major League Baseball manager another challenge or two, I'm okay with that. Get the cameras out of the clubhouse. Get the cameras out of the dugout. And if there's a camera in the clubhouse or the camera in the dugout, there's going to be sanctions against that team that does it. You want to keep this from happening again? Do your friggin' job, Major League Baseball. Because once again, just like you did in the steroids era, you turned the other way while this stuff was going on. You knew having cameras in the dugout in the clubhouse probably wasn't a good idea. Just like Bud Selig noticed the players blowing up like blimps. Barry Bonds looks like Shaq. You turn the other way because it's good for business. Major League Baseball, this precious game that we got, is full of frauds. From its commissioners, to its executives, to its teams, to its players. Baseball is a bad game. Baseball is a game that started from the inception of deviousness. Athletes in the 19th century were more criminals than athletes. And you're going to tell me that baseball is this sacred game? Players that take money from gamblers that bet on their team to lose so they get money? Players that use steroids? Racist owners that keep blacks from being in the game for 80 years? Steroids? Cheating scandals? Baseball is this precious game? Are you serious? Stop it already. Baseball is a game brought up on gamesmanship. Baseball is a game brought up on deviousness and trying to get advantage over the opposition. Whether it's pine tar on a ball or a glove, spitballs, amphetamines, PEDs, anything somebody can use to get an advantage, they use it. Oh my God, I feel cheated. I'm going to conclude this show by telling you to shut the hell up. You sound like a fool. Baseball is not a precious game. Baseball is a game that has thrived off of deviousness for 150 years. And you're going to act like you're all up in arms because there's another scandal. You sound like a damn fool. We'll be back with you Saturday. We'll talk a little more football. Hope you enjoy the rest of your Thursday and Friday. This is the Passball Show brought to you by JohnPLA.com, by 2 Ways, 1 Passion Food Truck, located in Scranton, Pennsylvania, as well as St. Aloysius Church and School in Jackson, New Jersey. God bless you, and as always, I'll see you on the other side.